In this video, under the heading of Adobe Camera Raw, we're going to take a look at snapshots, presets and profiles. While we're working our images through Adobe Camera Raw, we can take a snapshot at any stage we like. All it does is what the name suggests. A snapshot records all our image editing up to that point, and it leaves us with a quick and easy route back a few steps if we change our mind a little later. In some respects, it's a bit like our undo history in Photoshop, but here we have to take the snapshot ourselves. Now, where snapshots differ from the undo history in Photoshop is that in Adobe Camera Raw, snapshots are saved with the image, either when we open the image up into Photoshop or whether we click the Done button down at the extreme bottom right. So when we come back on another day, and if we need to open the image up as a raw file, our snapshots are all in place. Now, they're very quick and easy to create. I've done a little bit of work on this. I've just done the lens corrections and I've done a little bit of straightening of the horizon and cropping. So what I could do is go to my snapshots, click, and right down at the bottom right, click to make a new snapshot, and I get the opportunity to give the snapshot a name. Let's just keep things simple and say this is the first one. I'll use the Enter key rather than the OK. Now I can go back to my editing and I may want to continue. For example, let me pick up my white balance tool and click into the C. There, I've balanced that up pretty nicely. Let's put a healthy amount of clarity and vibrance and make another snapshot. Back up to the top, click down the bottom right. This one can be number 2. Let's do one more for luck. As I'm working through, I get the wild idea to make this into a monochrome. So I take all the color off, I push the clarity a bit more, the blacks, the whites, and make another snapshot. Number 3, of course. And what I'll do next, just to demonstrate this, is to click Done. The image will leave the screen, but all of those settings have been saved. Now, that appeared from what I was doing yesterday, so that's a little bit of a mistake, but there you have another look at a picture we were working on in a previous video. I'll get rid of that, but before I do, I'll right click over the left hand side and reset my background to grey and remove that, because what I really wanted to do was to take you down and open up Bridge. There's the image that I've just been working on. If I double click, we'll open up directly in Camera Raw. If I go to my snapshots and go to number 1, one thing you'll notice about snapshots is they apply the change when we do a mouse over, so I don't have to click. So I get the opportunity to just click around and view what I've done. But if I decided to go back to number 2, then I click number 2, and now I can proceed from there. So creating snapshots is pretty easy, and if you've watched the video that I called SatNav for Raw Editing, I actually used them to plot a complete manipulation over 10 stages. But if we go back, at any time we can just select one of those and go down to the bin and remove it too. But it will save with the image for as long as we need it until you do what I'm doing here. Let's move on to presets and profiles. Now, although these two may seem somewhat similar, there is a subtle difference between a preset and a profile. Let's take a look at presets first. Whenever we select a preset, whatever settings we currently have in the image, they're going to be overwritten by the preset we're now going to apply. In other words, you can't add one preset to another. Now, I'm going to contradict my own statement just a little bit by saying when we make our own presets, we do have the opportunity of limiting changes to one or two different subjects, but generally speaking, if we think of presets as being something that's always going to overwrite the previous, then we won't go too far wrong. To select the presets, we need to go up to the icon just to the left of the snapshots beneath the histogram. This is the one we want, and when we open it up we can see a number of presets already available for us. Let me just demonstrate one or two of these. If we go to the color, for example, click, it'll open up. But I'll see the effect of the preset by just mousing over the title. So you can see an instant change to the picture with natural, bright, contrast, high contrast, vivid and matte. So if we like the high contrast, we could select that. Then we could go back to our basic tab and we could continue the manipulation from there. Now I think it's probably best if you try out all of these ready-made presets yourself, but I'll just look at one more. Let's look at the creative one. Desaturated contrast, cool light, turquoise red. Well, I think you get the idea. But what we want to do is we want to make our own user preset. When I begin a manipulation in Adobe Camera Raw, there are one or two things I seem to find myself doing with every single image. So that's the sort of thing that would lend itself well to a preset. So what I'm going to do is quickly set one up. I've got an image open here. I'm going to go to my basic tab, and you may remember that the first thing I generally do is go to the lens corrections. I tick the box to fix the chromatic aberration and also to enable profile corrections. But I also feel that the blue color that my particular camera produces, I like to adjust it a little bit using the hue, saturation and luminance slider. But I seem to do that practically every time, and even if the picture didn't have any blue sky, it's such a small change, it's not making a great deal of difference to those that don't have a sky. So I'm happy to put this in a preset. So I'm going to go to my hue, saturation and luminance and to the hue tab, and all I want to do is to move my blue slider forward no more than 8, because I find the blue color is just a bit nicer on my eye. Now what I can do is to set that up as a preset. So let's go to the presets and make a start. If we go down to the bottom right, we've got an option that says new preset, which we can select. Now we get the opportunity to put the preset within a set called user presets, or we can make as many sets as we like. Here I don't think that's really necessary. All I'm going to do here is put lens and blue, because that's going to tell me everything I need to know. If you look down all of the settings which are ticked here, you can see practically every option within Adobe Camera Raw. So supposing we click check none, then we just go down and tick the ones that we've changed. Now we did the hue, saturation and luminance adjustments, and we also did the lens profile corrections. So all that's going to do is to lock just those two into my preset. I've already given it a name. I can click OK, and you'll see what happens over on the right hand side. Now as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, I've opened up a completely new raw image to demonstrate the preset that we've just created. If I go back to my presets as if this was a brand new piece of work, there's the option. When I mouse over, you can see the blue changes slightly and you can see the lens corrections applied. I can just click that and we can move on. The preset has been applied. As you will expect, Photoshop gives us more options than we can shake a stick at, probably many more than we're ever likely to use. But if we just go alongside the preset that I've made and right click, there you can see the options we have. Add to favorites. Now that could be useful, and I'll show you that in a moment or two. Hide it, move it, rename it, delete it. but we can also import profiles and presets, and of course delete them too. With the spinning round of the screen, the image you're now viewing is actually an infrared image. It was shot with an infrared converted camera, a Canon 5D, and as you can see it does show quite a strong magenta cast. Now what I found in using the camera is that when I start to manipulate them, I have to do a number of changes. One of those is to remove the saturation because I'm interested in the black and white nature. I almost always have to give a healthy slug of clarity, and sometimes even a little less blacks and a bit more whites. So what I do to help myself is I make those changes and apply them to a preset. Let me do that by going back to my presets, and we'll choose a new one. On this occasion I'll just call this infrared, and I'm not going to bother adjusting any of these because I'm just going to allow it to change all of them, because I know it's only going to affect the ones that I've actually applied. So let's just click OK to that, and you'll notice now that I've got two presets in my user presets. So I'm going to cancel this and we'll open up another image. Back to bridge, I'll pick one other. This one over here will do. When I go to my presets, I can select my infrared, and there we have the basics applied, and I can move on with my manipulation from that point. One of the other things I can do with my presets is I can apply them to favorites, and that gives me access to them in Adobe's Bridge. Let me demonstrate how useful that can be. I'm going to go up to my infrared. There's the little star, and the tooltip says add to favorites, and when I click that you'll see a favorites option open up at the top, and infrared is within it. I'll just click done here, and one of the things I found in practice is once I've done this, if Adobe's Bridge is already open on screen, just close it and relaunch it. Now as you can see, I've just done that. There's the image I had on screen just a few moments ago. But there you can also see a huge batch of infrared images. Now I can select a whole batch of these. I'll just choose the ones that are currently visible. So I'm going to hold my shift key and select the last of those. So all of those are now selected. Then if I right click over any one of these, I get an option to go to develop settings, and within the develop settings the favorites that I created a few months ago is here. So when I click it here, the changes are applied to all of the images. Now you can see just how quick Photoshop deals with this, and it's very useful, but I'm not locked in, because if I just remove the selection for a moment, let me open up this image, because although the preset is going to be applied to this, of course I'm not locked in, because I can back away from the amount of clarity I gave, or the blacks, or the whites, or anything else. But generally speaking, the changes that the preset inputs into the picture are generally the ones I'm going to want to use. Let's turn our attention next to the profiles, which act rather like filters. They can be applied at the end of any raw manipulation, and the changes we make will be added to what we've already done. It won't replace them as we see with presets. Now you may be surprised to see me with a picture opened up in Photoshop, but I'll use this to demonstrate another option that Photoshop does give us, and that's the option to open up a JPEG into Adobe Camera Raw. It's not quite the same, of course, as working with an absolute raw file, but once we get used to using the raw sliders, if ever we need to manipulate a JPEG, then what I've found is I turn to Adobe Camera Raw. So to take this image into Adobe Camera Raw, even though it's now a flattened JPEG, we go to the filters at the top of Photoshop and we choose Camera Raw Filter. but it is going to allow us to apply the profiles in exactly the same way as we would if we just worked this through from a start to finish raw file. And you'll notice the profiles are up just below the row of icons that we've been using quite a bit. To get access to the profiles, I'm going to click the little icon here. The tooltip says Browse Profiles, and they'll open up. You'll notice we've got a number of options there: Basic, Artistic, Black and White, Modern and Vintage. Well, let's take a look at Artistic, because they're all going to work in much the same way. When I select them, you can see as I mouse over, I get the view of the image, so I can take a look. And if I see anything here that I think works, then I can just select it. Of all of them, the one I like best would be Artistic, so I would select that and I can make use of that. But if I want to close down from here, we have to go to the Close button. But once I do that, the profile I've applied is still applied to the image, and we can see that here in the little panel to the right of the word Profile. Now we do get the opportunity to temper what we've just done with that profile. So if we like the effect but think it's gone a little too far, then we are given a slider here and we can just temper the effect of the tool. And if I jump from one end to the other, you can see how we can make those changes. But there's not a great deal more that we can say about these tools, because if I shut down the Artistic and go to the Vintage, now we can see a new set. Mousing over all of them, but when we find something that works to our advantage, if we do, then we can just click and we're done. So here's another image that I've opened up from Photoshop, already a filtered image as you can see. But I can open it up via the Camera Raw filter, because the way the profiles work is exactly the same. And I've got the Vintage options open, so I could look at the picture as is and decide if I like it a little bit better with some of the effects you can see as I mouse over the picture. And whenever I see something which I feel appeals to me, if that was it, I can click and OK, and there's my image opened up in Photoshop. So snapshots within Adobe Camera Raw are very much like our undo history in Photoshop, but the main difference is we need to choose when to make a snapshot, and also the snapshots are saved with the image and we can come back to them later. Presets allow us to speed up the manipulation process, particularly when we make them into a favorite and then give ourselves access to them in Photoshop's bridge. And finally, profiles, which are rather like applying a filter at the end of the manipulation process, but of course we can apply them at any stage. And I also sneaked in the fact that we can open up any other file type into Adobe Camera Raw, even if it's not a RAW file.